This is Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. We're fresh off the municipal primaries. Local Democrats and Republicans have selected their candidates for the November election in some high profile local races, including the mayors of the two largest cities and executives for both Lehigh and Northampton counties. I'm joined by political scientist Chris Borick to break down the unofficial results. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
I want to start in Allentown, where incumbent Matt Turk trounced challenger Ed Zuckel in the Democratic primary. Turk had some warts, including allegations of discrimination in his administration, but he secured 80% of the votes. What made him so successful?
It's a wonderful question. Mayor Turk, as you noticed, has had some challenges, at least publicly, in terms of these accusations within his administration, and certainly had a challenger that seemed to have some space, if you will, or lane in the race that might give him a pretty substantial push in this race. But that didn't turn out that way at all. I think the mayor is a very tireless campaigner. He is out and about. Anybody that knows the mayor, he's a healthy young runner, and he literally was running from place to place, right, or biking, I think, on election day, if I saw right. And so that matters, right, how you campaign in a primary that I'm sure we'll talk about, that we're not looking at enormous numbers of people. So if you could mobilize, a few thousand individuals and get them out, you have an opportunity. He has, beyond his campaigning techniques, Mayor Turk, I think, has things that he can take out on a campaign trail and say success in terms of development in the city and what's happening in the downtown and some other regions of the community that he can say, look, I want to complete this. Give me more time to do it. And I think in the end, that's a big part of the deal. We could always talk about the alternative and shortcomings, if you will, perhaps in the campaign that his challenger Zuckel had. So it's a combination of those things.
And for example, one of the things you're talking about, his administration did secure, I think it was a $20 million grant from the Biden administration for, it was a pretty rare. I think there's only like less than 10, I think, across the country that were awarded out for that type of work development. So now he does have some things to hang his hat on. But yeah, I fully expected him to win that race, but I did not think it was going to be as lopsided as it turned out to be.
Yeah, that's that anytime you get to that number that you said, it really is. It's in any race to have overwhelming victory, even in a primary, right? Even as an incumbent, says something probably again about the mayor and also the challenger in this case.
Meanwhile, in Northampton County, Tara Zirinsky cruised to victory in the Democratic primary for county executive. She's an established, vocal, progressive candidate, so it's not shocking that she won the primary where like-minded people tend to vote. But it's a swing county that flipped back to Donald Trump last fall. How do you think she'll fare in November against Republican Tom Giovanni?
Yeah, that's going to be fascinating to look at. I love, I'm a resident in Northampton County. I love the politics there because it is so balanced. It's so representative. We've talked many times. I think it's the best bellwether county in all of Pennsylvania in terms of predicting what happens statewide. So I'll be fascinated to see how that race plays out. So as she said, she's quite progressive in terms of her politics if you look at her record. And that you might say, hey, is that maybe a little too left for a more center-leaning county? I think that will be part of the campaign. I think she'll probably be targeted as being too left, right? Too left for Northampton County. What she will have, I think, is the political winds at her back. If, as we've talked about so many times, Tom, political cycles play out the way they often do, these off-year elections following a change in administration in Washington aren't usually great for the president's party. President Trump, of course, is a Republican. And I think if you look historically, that's been a weight on whatever the president's party is. So there'll be kind of conflicting, I guess, pressures or factors that might give her an opportunity to really use perhaps her progressiveness in a way as a counter to the mood that we're seeing in terms of the president's party.
One thing that stands out is that I think she's the better known quantity, or she's the better known candidate in this race. Tom Giovanni, he's a member of the county commissioners. He's been in office for 4 years, but he's been an unusually silent member. Like, he shows up, he does the work, he votes, but it's hard to, before he launched his campaign, it's hard to think of him speaking publicly on a lot of matters. How does that impact the race, where you have someone who, like Tara Zrinski, is very front-facing, very public in her stances, has campaigned repeatedly throughout the last decade for different offices, versus a guy who's relatively unknown?
Yeah, you frame it in a way that we often think about in campaigns of the strengths and liabilities of people that are well known, right? They have name recognition. They have some outreach already established. And I think Tara Zrinski, who's been around local politics for quite some time, run a lot of races, held offices, certainly fits that category. For someone like Giovanni, who's not as known, I don't know polling on this, but I wonder, what percentage of Northampton County voters would recognize him. That goes for lots of local officials. It opens up both positives and negatives. One, you have to build name recognition, right? You have to have some identity there. Now, a lot of this is based on the R's and D's next to your name that people will vote on come this fall. That's different in a primary, right? That's going to be our cue, our cognitive shortcut that we use to evaluate candidates. But in his case, the absence of kind of a long record and not necessarily so many points that people can target and say, hey, you voted this way, or this was your past position, is a bit of a luxury, because you could say, well, you could establish your positions as you go along in a way that established candidates cannot.
It reminds me in some instances of a race we had a couple of years back. John Callahan ran against John Brown. Callahan was fresh off of a congressional race. He did not win. He lost to Charlie Dent, but he was well-known, two-term mayor of Bethlehem with a ton of money behind him. And he ultimately lost to Brown, who is the little-known mayor of Bangor, who didn't have, I think he raised $50,000 compared to several hundred thousand for Callahan. But the wins were behind Brown. That was the middle of Obama's term in office. Things were leaning back towards the Republican side of things. How important is that in a local election like this, where the national mood is?
Yeah, that's what a great example. That's why you're a good reporter, Tom, bringing those examples back in. That's a perfect example, right? Because as you established, Mayor Callahan, right, was pretty known, had run for office, well-established, well-funded, and at that time, Mayor Brown of Bangor, I could almost overlay what I just said about Giovanni, right? I mean, that's going to be somebody that hardly anybody outside the Slate Belt would know. But as you noted, the outcome certainly was the underfunded, unknown quantity over the others. And what's the big factor in that? The cycle. People probably get really annoyed of me saying that so often, but politics is so affected by political cycles, right? Candidates matter, campaigns matter, but oh my gosh, the cycles of American politics, the currents. Think about a current if you're swimming. If you have to swim into a current, you got to work a lot harder. If you're getting with the current with you, you take it a ride and see where it could take you.
We have a similar situation in Lehigh County, which tends to lean more Democratic than Northampton. There we have Josh Siegel, a Democratic state representative, who's already being attacked as a liberal extremist by conservatives. He'll face Republican Roger McLean, who's campaigning as more of a moderate. Republicans haven't won that race in 20 years. Can McLean change that?
It'll be, again, he'll be probably going against the currents, which is a challenge. And he's running against someone in Representative Siegel that I think Republicans have absolutely targeted to say he's, as we talked about with Tara Zirinsky, going to be basically framed for voters as being way left, right? Way left. Now we could decide what way left is and look at Representative Siegel's record on city council and in Harrisburg and make a determination. But ultimately, that's going to be what the race is for. And I think that's the avenue. If I was a Republican in Lehigh County and thinking in a tough cycle, I probably want to make a case that, look, we're putting up someone that's mainstream, if you will, more centrist in their politics and fiscal politics, and the alternative is someone that's too far left. There was a race, I'll flip, and this doesn't apply necessarily to these two candidates that we're talking about, but you remember a few years ago when Lamont McClure was running for his office in a cycle, where you could say, well, is someone like McClure, and I forget the Republican candidate.
It was Stephen Lynch you're thinking
Stephen
about
Lynch,
in
yes.
2021.
Yeah. Stephen Lynch, who was really kind of far out. So this is a cycle where you think it's good for Republicans, right? This is coming off the Biden election. And you say, well, look, could this be an opening for Republicans to have? But Lynch was full on, all in kind of MAGA, but beyond, I would even say.
No, yeah.
And he lost by 10 points, right?
I thought it was more than that.
Oh, it might be,
it might have, he lost by a wider margin than any other Republican on the ballot that year.
Yeah. And so if you could kind of, even in a good cycle, or a cycle that might be kind of leaning against you, if you can make the opponent really seem like they're far out there, even if they got the wins at their back, it could give you an avenue. So I don't know if that's going to play out in Lehigh County, but if I'm Republicans, I'm thinking that's our path forward.
How much do you think Republicans might be willing to embrace McLean? Like he's gotten funding from Charlie Dent, wings of the party that a lot of Republicans have tried to distance themselves from, like tried to leave behind. So, is there an openness to that side of politics still?
Oh, I think so. I think especially at the local level. So if I'm McLean, and I have a support from someone like Charlie Dent or more traditional Republicans, I wear it in a race like this. Now you might say, well, is that going to alienate the MAGA wing of the party, the more populist wing of the party? Probably not. You're trying to build a coalition here, right? And you mentioned this is Lehigh County, which tends to move more democratically in its elections, especially over the last few decades. And so you're trying to craft, right, an image that allows you to take in some centrist folks there that might have kind of moved Democratic, and then again juxtapose that, make your case that the alternative, in this case Siegel, is too far left, and I think I would probably own that nicely.
The biggest story of the primaries may have been who didn't show up. Turnout fell to 17.7% in Northampton County, 16.3% in Lehigh County. That's a sharp drop off from 4 years ago, let alone like the 75% levels that we saw in the 2024 general election. What happened?
It's a great question. We've been thinking about this, Tom. So one thing is, I'm a political scientist, and I think we're talking about cycles and all these things right now. You should never kind of get caught up in a moment and allow things like motivated reasoning to take over. And in my mind, I think I was suffering a little bit of motivated reasoning thinking about this race. I'm thinking, wow, okay, we got mail ballots now. We've had this for the last few years. It seems to have aligned with a little uptick in turnout that we saw in the last few off-year elections. There's lots going on in politics, and that we should, maybe expect it even to nudge up a little bit from 20%, 21, 22, somewhere in that range. I thought the conditions might be there for that. However, usually things tend to regress to the mean over time. That outliers, when we have outlier turnout, it usually kind of goes back to where it was. And as you'll know, if we look back, 10 years ago and in those time frames, this is where we were, or even a little bit less.
Even worse.
Even
Yeah.
worse. And so maybe I should have been thinking about the last 2 cycles as outliers. They came in this kind of unique time, COVID and excitement about mail for some parts of the party, or at least one party, and that might have been an artificial boost, and that once that sugar
Waned.
high was gone,
Yeah.
it starts going down. And I wasn't. I again, like I said, I think I was thinking in this race, thinking, yeah, maybe the conditions right now are to keep this moving upward, when the gravity and the regression to the mean should have been the way I thought about it.
For the first time, mail-ins accounted for more than 40% of all ballots cast last Tuesday, here in the Valley at least. Do you expect that trend to continue? And does it matter how people are voting?
Yeah, I'll take the first part, and I think, yes, it will. I mean, as long as this is a method that's available, Tom, and people find it convenient, they're going to use it, right? And we've seen efforts on the part of Republicans statewide in the Valley to make Republican voters more comfortable with the method. And so we're seeing this, right? We're seeing individuals be pretty comfortable. So I expect it to be used. Now, here's the big question. Is a mail vote bringing in new individuals that wouldn't otherwise be there, or is it just moving it from the day of voting now to this method as a substitute, right? We think in a lot of poli-sci today in economics, instead of a complement, that it's adding something, a complement, is it a substitute? Are we substituting one for the other? And I think in this particular cycle, it was acting like a substitute. These were super voters that show up all the time. And now they're super voting through mail rather than showing up on Election Day.
That's Muhlenberg College political scientist Chris Borick. This has been Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell.